When Johnny Carson's famous blue curtain opened each night, millions of Americans expected polished professionalism. The host would deliver his opening jokes, settle into his chair, and begin interviewing Hollywood's biggest names. Everything appeared seamless and perfectly controlled. But what audiences didn't see was the chaos lurking just beyond camera range. Celebrities in various states of chemical enhancement waiting nervously to step into America's living rooms. He had this incredible instinct, recalls a producer who spent the 1970s working alongside Carson. Within moments of someone walking through that curtain, Johnny knew their condition. Drunk, high, cocaine, he could read it instantly. The truth behind The Tonight Show's polished exterior was far messier than viewers imagined. Production crews developed elaborate contingency plans. Staff members learned to spot warning signs. If you're enjoying this glimpse behind the curtain of classic TV history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. We've got plenty more Golden Age Hollywood secrets to uncover. We created an entire silent language, a former staffer explains. When Johnny touched his necktie during an introduction, it signaled our guest wasn't entirely coherent. 2 taps on his note cards meant keep the camera work simple. This person might do anything. The 70s were absolutely insane, the producer admits. Academy Award winners, music legends, they'd show up so impaired they struggled to recall basic information. Johnny's job became making everything appear natural while essentially guiding someone through an alternate reality. Today, we're diving into the most notorious incidents of celebrities appearing on The Tonight Show while clearly under the influence, and examining how Johnny Carson navigated these unpredictable moments with his trademark composure. The Tonight Show's backstage area saw more pre-show anxiety than perhaps anywhere else in television. This wasn't just another interview, explains a former talent coordinator. Carson could make or break careers in a single segment. And unlike modern talk shows with their carefully rehearsed segments, Johnny preferred spontaneous conversation. That terrified many guests. This intense environment created perfect conditions for self-medication. The green room featured a fully stocked bar with premium liquor. Guests arrived with pills, marijuana, cocaine, whatever they believed would calm their nerves. That green room bar was notorious, remembers a crew member. Carson personally selected the inventory, only the finest brands, but enforcing limits on major celebrities? Impossible. Carson himself enjoyed drinking, but maintained legendary control on camera. Johnny possessed this remarkable adaptive ability, his former producer explains. If someone was slightly loose from alcohol, he'd gently steer them. If they were truly incapacitated, he simplified everything, all while appearing completely natural. George Carlin, the high-functioning comic.
A new lifestyle which doesn't require my presence. And so I can, if I don't want to, I don't have to get up at all, and I still get credit for a full day.
George Carlin evolved from clean-cut comedian into counterculture prophet during the early 70s, openly embracing drug culture, changes reflected in his Tonight Show visits. He performed like absolute brilliance while grinning like someone very stoned, recalls a camera operator. George wasn't hiding anything. Those slightly glazed eyes became part of his signature look. Carlin appeared on The Tonight Show more than 130 times, becoming one of Carson's most beloved guests. Yet, despite this success, Carson never offered him a guest hosting role. Johnny adored George and deeply respected his genius, a former writer reveals. But guest hosting? Never. The unspoken reason was dependability. Johnny understood George's lifestyle and couldn't trust him to manage 90 minutes of live television. What distinguished Carlin was his functionality. While others became confused or erratic, Carlin remained razor-sharp and professional, just with that distinctly mellow energy regular viewers definitely recognized. Carson adjusted his technique, posing open-ended questions that let Carlin's brilliant mind wander in hilarious, fascinating directions. He'd introduce a topic, then sit back and let George explore it, the producer notes.
Carlin later confirmed everyone's suspicions in his autobiography, writing essentially that, of course, he was usually high during 70s Carson appearances. It was the 70s, and he was George Carlin.
Richard Pryor, comedy's unpredictable genius.
My friend,
thank you.
They all mean it. You know, I don't know where to start. First of all, how you feeling?
I feel...
Where Carlin represented functional cannabis use, Richard Pryor embodied something more volatile. A comedic genius whose substance issues sometimes transformed Tonight Show appearances from brilliant to alarming within moments. He'd be hysterical until he went cosmic, recalls a stage manager. Richard could begin as the sharpest person alive. Then suddenly his eyes would shift and he'd mentally travel elsewhere. Johnny had to work like a traffic controller bringing things back. Pryor's cocaine use, particularly, became increasingly problematic throughout the 70s, culminating in his devastating 1980 freebasing accident. Several Tonight Show appearances captured him at various points along this dark journey. One especially memorable 1978 segment started normally. Then Pryor launched into a childhood story that gradually dissolved into disconnected observations, his focus visibly fragmenting. The audience laughed nervously, uncertain whether this was intentional comedy. You watched Johnny shift into protection mode, the stage manager continues. He interjected with a quick question to redirect Richard, made a covering joke, then smoothly transitioned to commercial. It was masterful crisis management. Carson's handling demonstrated deep respect for Pryor's talent alongside genuine concern for his well-being. Johnny genuinely loved Richard's genius, explains a former NBC executive. He wasn't judgmental about substances, but he worried about Richard destroying himself. Truman Capote, literary icons, television disaster.
That was a double execution that night, and it took about an hour and a half from the time that the thing started till it was over.
Sometimes the most alarming incidents came from unexpected sources, like the distinguished author whose 1980 appearance became infamous for all the wrong reasons. America's literary treasure, completely obliterated, is how one production assistant bluntly described Truman Capote's disastrous Tonight Show moment. Capote had appeared numerous times over the years, typically displaying sharp wit. But his January 1980 visit differed dramatically from the moment he unsteadily entered the set. His speech was so slurred you could barely comprehend him, recalls a sound technician. His head kept dropping forward, then he jerked back with this confused look. The control room was in panic mode. Unlike his handling of Carlin or Pryor, Carson's response to Capote's condition was markedly different. His smile tightened, his questions simplified, as he attempted salvaging what was rapidly becoming unwatchable. Johnny was livid, his former producer reveals. Not on camera, he was too professional. But the instant they cut to break, he marched backstage and said, "That's it, he's finished here." What particularly infuriated Carson wasn't merely Capote's impairment, but what it represented: profound disrespect for the show and its audience. Capote's apparent combination of pills and alcohol rendered him essentially non-functional. The Capote incident prompted stricter backstage monitoring. Green room bar service became more carefully controlled. Capote never appeared on The Tonight Show again during Carson's tenure, one of the rare guests to receive a permanent ban. Cheech and Chong, authenticity in action. Some Tonight Show guests made zero pretense about their cannabis consumption, none more famously than comedy duo Cheech and Tommy Chong, whose entire brand celebrated marijuana culture. They weren't performing. That's genuinely where they existed mentally, laughs a former segment producer. What made Cheech and Chong unique was Carson's willingness to incorporate their state into the comedy. Carson played the straight man to their stoner humor. Johnny would adopt this exaggerated square persona with them, recalls a former writer. He'd feign confusion about their drug references, asking innocent questions that perfectly set them up. Everyone understood the joke. During one memorable appearance promoting Up in Smoke, Chong began a rambling story about production. Rather than redirecting him, Carson simply let it unfold, occasionally glancing at the camera with raised eyebrows that had audiences roaring. The contrast between buttoned-up Carson and openly stoned comedy duo created some of the era's most entertaining segments. There was genuine mutual respect, notes a cameraman. Johnny appreciated their honesty, and they appreciated being allowed to remain authentic. Peter Fonda's Easy Rider's difficult interview. The counterculture revolution brought new substances into mainstream consciousness, sometimes colliding spectacularly with network television, as happened during Peter Fonda's legendary 1970 appearance. He discussed time travel. The segment lasted 5 minutes, recalls a director, succinctly summarizing one of Tonight Show history's most bizarre interviews. Fonda, already famous for Easy Rider, arrived seemingly under what staffers strongly suspected was LSD's influence. His pupils were enormous, remembers a camera operator. He kept staring at the lights, then his hands, then he'd suddenly snap back and try answering Johnny's question from 30 seconds earlier. It was like watching someone phase in and out of our dimension. Carson shifted into damage control mode, asking extremely simple questions and seeking the earliest appropriate exit. The breaking point arrived when Carson asked about upcoming projects. Fonda began discussing a new film, then abruptly shifted to explaining how time isn't linear, but wrapped around us, and how we're all riding the cosmic consciousness wave. Johnny signaled, the director says. He tapped his cards twice, our emergency code for cut to commercial immediately. We were only 5 minutes into what should have been 12. When they returned, Fonda had vanished, replaced by the next guest with zero explanation. Carson simply continued as though nothing unusual had occurred. Fonda did return in later years, delivering more conventional interviews. The incident became Tonight Show legend. When enhancement becomes aggression. Not all chemically enhanced appearances were played for laughs. British actor Oliver Reed's infamous 1975 visit demonstrated how quickly substance use could transform entertainment into genuine concern. The man was obviously drunk, possibly on other substances too, recalls a former NBC page. Johnny went from amused to alarmed within 90 seconds. Reed arrived visibly intoxicated. What began as slurred responses rapidly escalated as Reed became increasingly animated and erratic. You could observe Johnny's expression transform when Reed started getting loud, the stage manager recalls. You could pinpoint the exact moment he realized this is someone volatile who might do absolutely anything. Reed began interrupting questions with nonsensical shouts. At one point, he unexpectedly stood and began demonstrating fighting stances, causing visible alarm among crew members. Carson took firm control, interrupting Reed's rambling, forcefully redirecting, and ultimately cutting the segment drastically short. Johnny had absolute zero tolerance for aggressive or threatening behavior, his former producer explains. The moment it turned hostile, he shut it down. Sammy Davis Jr., The entertainer's hidden fuel. Some appearances became legendary, not for obvious impairment, but for persistent whispered rumors. None generated more enduring speculation than Sammy Davis Jr.'s hyperkinetic 1974 interview. Polished on stage, frenetic backstage summarizes a production assistant, capturing the contrast between Davis's smooth performance and intense energy. Davis was a Carson favorite, but his 1974 appearance stood out for unusually amplified energy. He was talking incredibly fast, couldn't remain still, kept interrupting himself, recalls a sound technician. His eyes darted constantly. He just seemed accelerated. Industry insiders recognized telltale signs of cocaine use, increasingly common in mid-70s entertainment circles. Everyone backstage understood, claims the production assistant. This wasn't just Sammy's natural exuberance. This was chemical assistance. Carson adapted to Davis's elevated state with characteristic skill, allowing rapid-fire stories to flow while occasionally providing gentle guidance. What distinguished the Davis situation was his professionalism never wavered. Unlike guests who became incoherent or difficult, Davis remained charming and entertaining, just with considerably amplified intensity. Davis neither confirmed nor denied rumors later. When a reporter once asked directly, he reportedly smiled and said, "Baby, the 70s were the 70s. Let's leave it at that."
Johnny Carson's handling of these 7 high-flying guests reveals much about both the era and the man who defined late-night television for a generation. Johnny was navigating cultural revolution in real time, explains a television historian. He had to find balance between reflecting cultural shifts and maintaining broadcast television standards. Carson's approach demonstrated a nuanced philosophy prioritizing entertainment value and professionalism over moral judgment. He developed what staff called an impairment spectrum, different responses based on how a guest's state affected their ability to create quality television. Johnny didn't care what you did beforehand, as long as you could deliver on camera, his former producer says. George Carlin, stoned but brilliant, no problem. Truman Capote, incoherent, major problem. It wasn't about the substances themselves, it was about respecting the audience. While Carson tried presenting impaired guests in the best possible light, his tolerance had limits. When a guest's condition led to aggression, hostility, or complete non-functionality, Carson's tolerance ended immediately. Johnny had 3 unbreakable rules, explains a longtime staff member. Don't threaten anyone, don't disrespect the audience, and don't waste airtime. Break those and you wouldn't return. What's striking about Carson's era versus today is how these moments were handled. Today, a celebrity appearing visibly high would generate endless social media firestorms and apology tours. In Carson's day, it was just part of the show. For the guests themselves, Carson's handling often created lasting gratitude. Many later expressed appreciation for his protection during vulnerable moments. Richard Pryor once said Carson could have made him look foolish, but instead guided him safely through, recalls a writer who knew both men. This protective approach ultimately served both guests and the show itself. By treating chemically enhanced appearances as situations requiring management rather than scandals, Carson maintained The Tonight Show's reputation as a place where stars felt safe. Carson understood something fundamental about television. People tune in to be entertained, not to watch public humiliation. Even when a guest showed up high, Carson's goal remained the same: create good TV while preserving everyone's dignity. That's why he remained on top for 30 years.